On va lancer la première session de présentation un peu technique sur certains exemples de ce qui se fait dans l'IMT. Et on va commencer directement à IMT Atlantique. François Gallet qui va nous parler d'intégration d'antennes pour la 5 et la 6G, si j'ai bien compris. Donc, je te laisse la parole.
Voilà, c'est bien. Bien, bonjour à tous. Donc, je vais vous présenter aujourd'hui nos activités de recherche en lien, donc une partie de nos activités de recherche en lien avec le réseau du futur, entre tout ce qui est réseau 5G et 6G dans l'avenir, et plus spécifiquement faire un focus sur les enjeux sur la conception et l'intégration des antennes dans ces systèmes. Donc, ces travaux de recherche sont menés donc, avec d'autres collègues, Patrice Pajusco, Camilla Karnfeld, Christian Persson, et sont menés dans le cadre du laboratoire de recherche LabSTIC au niveau du CNRS. Alors, tout d'abord, ma présentation va se dérouler de la manière suivante. Je vais commencer par présenter le contexte de nos recherches pour comprendre les enjeux, les problématiques qu'on rencontre, et ensuite présenter trois sous-thématiques, donc, qui sont la problématique du sondage de canal, et ensuite la conception donc, de systèmes antennaires en bande millimétrique, et également la conception d'antennes avec aujourd'hui les nouvelles technologies 3D additives. Et je terminerai par une conclusion et des perspectives. Alors, tout d'abord, concernant le contexte, je vais illustrer cela en prenant un exemple qui n'est pas de la 5G, 6G, mais on retrouve les mêmes principes. C'est en se basant sur le Wi-Fi 6, actuellement le 802.11ax, qui fonctionne donc autour de la bande des 5 GHz et qui peut avoir une bande passante de canal jusqu'à 160 MHz. Donc, le débit qui est réglé va dépendre de la qualité de la liaison radio et directement via la sélection ce qu'on appelle le MCS index, qui va définir la modulation et puis le codage donc approprié. Donc, si on analyse un peu en détail les performances théoriques atteignables avec ce type de liaison, ce qu'on peut voir sur ce graphique-là, c'est en fonction, donc on peut analyser le débit en fonction donc de l'index de modulation et également en fonction du nombre de faisceaux spatiaux qu'on va pouvoir récupérer. Et également analyser donc l'évolution du SNR nécessaire, donc en fonction de l'indice de modulation et du nombre de flux spatiaux, pour pouvoir assurer donc la liaison, la communication de bonne qualité. Donc, si on se base sur des données réelles qu'on peut trouver donc, dans la littérature, sur des mesures dans des contextes donc, réels, on peut voir que le débit aujourd'hui maximum atteignable est de l'ordre de 1,5 gigabits par seconde, ce qui est déjà correct, mais par rapport au débit théorique maximum, qui est de l'ordre de 4,8 gigabits, on a quasiment un facteur 3 donc, en deçà. Donc la question qu'on peut se poser, c'est de se dire pourquoi est-ce qu'on a une telle différence? Quelles sont les origines? Quelles peuvent être les origines? Également, quelles sont les pistes qu'on peut voir pour essayer de remonter en fait ce débit-là et tendre vers le débit théorique? Alors tout d'abord, une des raisons qui peut être à ce niveau-là, c'est l'appauvrissement du nombre de multitrajets avec la montée en fréquence, donc dans l'environnement. Donc derrière, ça va directement avoir un impact sur avoir moins de flux spatiaux exploitables. L'autre contrainte, en fait, concerne principalement les antennes, justement, sur leur intégration, liée, par exemple, aux contraintes de dimension maximale du dispositif, donc le nombre d'antennes qu'on peut intégrer dedans, la distance entre les antennes, donc on peut ramener ça à une notion de longueur d'onde, et puis également le diagramme de rayonnement des antennes. Et donc tout cela va impacter bien le niveau de corrélation entre les signaux. Généralement, on suppose qu'ils sont complètement décorrélés quand on récupère les flux spatiaux. Le nombre maximum de signaux exploités, parce que dans certaines directions, peut-être liées au diagramme de rayonnement, on n'a pas de puissance reçue. Et directement, donc oui, au niveau de la puissance reçue, eh bien, va directement impacter le niveau du rapport signal sur bruit. Donc idéalement, bien, l'antenne idéale, ça serait d'avoir une antenne la plus omnidirectionnelle possible pour avoir le maximum de flux spatiaux, mais en ayant en même temps du gain pour pouvoir avoir un niveau de puissance reçue suffisant pour respecter le SNR. Ce qui est physiquement impossible. Le principe d'une antenne omnidirectionnelle, c'est d'avoir une faible directivité. Donc la solution qu'on voit aujourd'hui, c'est la notion de faire de la formation de faisceau. C'est-à-dire modifier le diagramme de rayonnement donc, du système antennaire pour venir focaliser donc, dans les certaines directions où on aura des flux spatiaux exploitables. Donc typiquement un exemple où on va pouvoir profiter de réflexions donc, sur les murs, sur l'environnement. Et également permettre aussi des communications, même en cas de blocage, donc avec un obstacle entre les deux, de pouvoir exploiter seulement les trajets réfléchis. Donc ce sont des solutions qui sont déjà intégrées dans plusieurs produits qu'on peut voir. Mais aujourd'hui, principalement, c'est via l'intégration de codebooks qui sont prédéfinis et qui permettent de générer différents faisceaux donc à ce niveau-là. Donc étant donné que ces faisceaux sont figés, ça peut être une des explications aujourd'hui de cette limitation. Et justement, ce qu'on voit en termes de recherche aujourd'hui, l'avancement à ce niveau-là, c'est le traitement qui peut être intégré donc, au niveau donc, de la couche channel layer. Donc c'est être capable d'analyser, l'idée c'est en temps réel, eh bien, le canal de propagation, et ensuite, à partir de là, de pouvoir, aujourd'hui on voit de nombreux travaux autour de l'intelligence artificielle qui va permettre d'analyser ce canal-là et de pouvoir, comme ça, définir les paramètres de réglage de la formation de faisceaux, soit aujourd'hui, pour avoir le maximum de flexibilité, 100% analogique, mais également avec la possibilité d'y associer la formation de faisceaux analogique. Alors à ce niveau-là, quels sont les enjeux au niveau de la couche physique et vraiment matérielle À ce niveau-là, c'est déjà d'avoir une première connaissance plus précise du canal de propagation. Donc en termes de sondage de canal, être capable d'avoir une meilleure précision, typiquement sur les directions d'arrivée, donc dans l'environnement. Et l'autre enjeu, concernant la partie intégration des antennes, eh bien, c'est d'avoir le numérique vraiment au cœur de l'antenne. Et ainsi, permet d'avoir le maximum de flexibilité pour pouvoir créer les diagrammes de rayonnement souhaités. Alors, pour ça, bien, au niveau de l'équipe, on a déjà travaillé depuis plusieurs années sur le sondage de canal. Donc, on a conçu un produit que je vais vous présenter qui nous permet déjà de faire des mesures donc, en dessous des 6 GHz. Donc, cet équipement, en fait, la base, c'est un équipement radiologiciel, ETUS, un USRP, qu'on peut, justement, pour la partie synchronisation, connecter à un GPS, qui est piloté donc, via un PC embarqué. On verra les applications tout à l'heure, la possibilité de rajouter une caméra donc, pour pouvoir visualiser la scène observée. Et également un bloc d'interface pour pouvoir piloter les systèmes antennaires qui peuvent être soit en émission, soit en réflexion. Et donc aujourd'hui, avec ce type de boîtier, on a possibilité d'intégrer 2 systèmes antennaires. Concernant l'environnement de programmation, on va utiliser différents types de langages. Et l'objectif, c'est d'avoir, profiter la notion de temps réel, d'acquisition temps réel, et ensuite après toute la partie analyse et visualisation en temps réel. Donc voici quelques prototypes antennaires qu'on a développés, classiques, qui nous permet de faire des tests où on a des matrices, soit des réseaux qui sont planaires à 2,45. L'idée, c'est de n'analyser que dans un secteur angulaire, soit des réseaux qui sont dits circulaires, qui vont permettre de faire une analyse donc, dans un plan donc, omnidirectionnel et définir les directions d'arrivée, ou des systèmes qui seront vraiment des systèmes intégrés, on va dire, où là, on va pouvoir analyser les performances qu'on pourra avoir, mais dans le principe de se dire ce sont des systèmes qui vont être intégrés dans le dispositif, donc avec des contraintes fortes sur le dimensionnement. Donc ici, le dernier, typiquement, ça pourrait être un équipement 5G, donc avec plusieurs antennes autour. Afin, comme je disais, de chercher vraiment à améliorer la précision donc sur la mesure, Donc nous avons conçu donc, une antenne donc, avec 64 éléments, avec une double polarisation. Donc le principe de cette antenne-là, c'est d'avoir un module élémentaire constitué de 8 fentes, donc en polar vertical, 8 fentes en polarisation horizontale, donc avoir comme ça l'information vraiment de la polarisation de l'onde. Et ce module-là, et donc cette partie-là, on va pouvoir venir intégrer donc une matrice de commutation pour venir sélectionner les différentes antennes. Et ensuite, eh bien, cette brique, on va pouvoir l'assembler pour pouvoir créer notre réseau d'antennes selon la configuration qu'on souhaite. Et à ce niveau-là, donc, on a réalisé cette antenne complète, donc avec 64 éléments double polarisation. Donc voilà au final le système complet, donc avec l'équipement radiologiciel, piloté et l'antenne. Donc ça nous permet d'avoir un système vraiment compact, portatif, environ 13 kg au total, une consommation de 150 watts, donc qui peut être vraiment embarqué, par exemple dans un véhicule, et alimenté via le véhicule, et avoir en même temps la possibilité de visualiser en temps réel eh bien, la réponse en fait, du canal. Alors, pour illustrer, hop, je crois que j'ai passé une... Voilà. Alors, pour illustrer, la vidéo n'est pas lancée. Voilà, c'est bon. Donc voilà une illustration en temps réel. Grâce à la caméra, on va pouvoir visualiser eh bien, la scène et voir le déplacement donc, et l'angle d'arrivée qui va bouger en temps réel. Autre application, ben, c'est justement grâce à la double polarisation de pouvoir vraiment visualiser les effets de dépolarisation, par exemple, dans l'environnement. Donc voir entre une polarisation linéaire ou circulaire. Et également, bah, ce qui peut être vraiment intéressant, c'est de visualiser les multitrajets dans un environnement. Donc là, on vient tourner l'antenne. Et ce qu'on voit, on va voir en temps réel eh bien, le trajet direct là, et le multitrajet dans le mur, donc en face. Donc c'est le côté visualisation, mais après, voilà, toutes les données peuvent être traitées pour vraiment faire de la réponse impulsionnelle, entre autres au niveau du canal. Donc c'est un outil en plus qui est très pédagogique pour pouvoir illustrer tous ces phénomènes-là. Alors, en plus du côté localisation, on a fait des travaux où on va travailler sur le décodage des signaux. Donc là, on a pris un exemple autour du Wi-Fi et qui va nous permettre comme ça, eh bien, en plaçant des équipements, donc type gateway ici, et puis un smartphone, qui vont émettre en Wi-Fi, eh bien, de pouvoir les localiser et en même temps les identifier. Donc avec derrière, on peut imaginer beaucoup d'applications, entre autres dans le domaine de la sécurité. Alors maintenant, je vais passer à la deuxième thématique qui concerne les systèmes antennaires en bande millimétrique. Donc l'objectif, en fait, c'était de travailler donc, toujours dans le domaine du sondage de canal, mais monter en fréquence dans le domaine millimétrique. Donc là, on a mené un projet à travers, donc ça a été 2 projets, le projet M5 Estia et le projet Millimeter Wave Sonder, donc à 60 gigas, où on a conçu un front-end TRF, donc on peut voir sur la gauche. Alors, étant donné les pertes qu'on a à 60 GHz, eh bien, on doit intégrer au plus proche possible de l'antenne eh bien, la partie transposition de fréquence, ce qui nécessite d'intégrer l'électronique vraiment au cœur de l'antenne. Et étant donné aux bandes millimétriques en fait, les pertes qu'on peut avoir en espace libre, eh bien, on vient rajouter un système qui va permettre de faire de la formation de faisceaux analogiques, qui est un réseau transmetteur qu'on peut voir au milieu, qui agit comme une lentille, sauf qu'elle est vraiment plate. Et donc, de cette manière-là, on va pouvoir créer un système, et à droite, eh bien, on voit tous les faisceaux qu'on va pouvoir créer simultanément, et donc pouvoir couvrir une zone en sectorisant par faisceau. Aujourd'hui, eh bien, où est-ce qu'on en est ? Eh bien, on a intégré cette antenne-là dans un sondeur, donc on a la photo en bas qui montre l'antenne. Autour, on voit la partie transposition de fréquence et on sort directement en bande de base. Et ces signaux en bande de base seront directement connectés au sondeur que j'ai présenté précédemment. Et en bas, une des contraintes fortes qu'on a sur la partie basse du proto, c'est tout ce qui est oscillateur, parce qu'on doit s'assurer d'une bonne synchronisation entre toutes les voies. Aujourd'hui, eh bien, on mène ce travail-là dans le cadre d'un projet ANR, en collaboration avec l'université Gustave Eiffel, mené par Marion Bermineau, où l'objectif, eh bien, ça va être d'étudier le canal de propagation dans des ondes millimétriques pour tout ce qui est liaison ferroviaire, train-train, train-infrastructure. Également, cette antenne-là, eh bien, on l'a exploitée, en tout cas ce sont ses performances, pour analyser, dans le cadre d'un travail de thèse, donc qui sera soutenu très prochainement avec Orange Labs, sur l'impact en fait, du blocage donc, sur une liaison donc, via un simulateur donc 5G développé par Orange, et de regarder l'apport d'un système antennaire multifaisceau réel, donc, comme celui-là, et regarder son apport en fait, sur la liaison. Donc c'est ce qu'on peut voir en bas, au niveau donc, de la courbe qui présente le BLER en fonction du SNR. Alors, notre objectif, eh bien, c'est autour des systèmes antennaires en bande millimétrique. Le prototype réalisé n'est pas du tout compact. Et donc là, l'objectif, eh bien, aujourd'hui, c'est de pouvoir continuer à travailler sur l'intégration donc, technologique de ces modules antennaires. Avec deux enjeux, d'avoir le numérique, comme j'ai dit, au cœur de l'antenne, et puis aussi une minimisation des pertes d'interconnexion, donc antenne-circuit dans les bandes millimétriques. Donc le principe, c'est d'utiliser ce qu'on appelle les technologies SIP, System in Package. On va venir intégrer donc, tous ces modules, ces fonctions en 3D. Les applications visées, eh bien, c'est tout ce qui est communication sans fil avec de la formation de faisceaux hybrides, analogique, numérique, mais également ouvert à tout un domaine qui est l'imagerie terahertz ou submillimétrique avec des fonctionnalités de scan électronique. Alors, concernant en fait, au niveau du laboratoire, donc, nous avons deux axes sur lesquels on s'appuie. Un, sur la partie technologie, donc on a notre propre filière technologie LTCC. Le principe, c'est de pouvoir créer des modules 3D avec des feuilles de céramique très fines, avec ici quelques exemples de réalisation. Une puce intégrée donc, sur LTCC jusqu'à 170 GHz et une antenne DRA, résonateur diélectrique, donc sur LTCC. Et également étudier donc, les effets thermiques avec des solutions de canaux microfluidiques pour refroidir les équipements. Également, on a un axe sur tout ce qui est justement caractérisation des systèmes antennaires multifaisceaux. Et donc, on développe des bancs spécifiques donc de mesure d'antenne à partir d'un robot qui permet comme ça d'avoir l'équipement sous test fixe, non mobile. Alors, la dernière activité concerne tout ce qui est conception aussi d'antennes justement en technologie additive. Donc là, on va réaliser ces antennes en matière plastique et après, on va travailler sur leur métallisation. Donc là, ce sont des travaux en partenariat avec principalement une société, Elliptica, qui possède ces process de fabrication. L'intérêt, ça peut être d'avoir une liberté totale sur les formes 3D et derrière, des réductions de coûts envisageables. Alors, par rapport à tout ça, eh bien, c'est de voir en fait revoir tout le process de conception de l'antenne, des spécifications donc jusqu'à la caractérisation. Et comme il y a beaucoup de données disponibles, aussi il y a des réflexions de se dire l'IA aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qu'elle peut apporter pour améliorer le process de fabrication. Donc typiquement, prendre en compte des données qui sont issues du prototypage, du procédé de fabrication, qui seront directement utiles, par exemple, à la définition des modèles comportementaux. Alors, en conclusion, donc aujourd'hui, on a une certaine expertise dans le domaine du sondage du canal. On met en œuvre en fait des systèmes de mesure vraiment spécifiques et on développe également des plateformes technologiques 3D. Et donc l'objectif aujourd'hui, c'est aussi d'élargir notre collaboration dans le domaine du traitement du signal, l'information, comme j'ai pu le montrer, et puis à notre niveau, renforcer notre positionnement sur la technologie LTCC. Aujourd'hui, on est les seuls en France a proposé cette technologie et la technologie 3D additive. Voilà, je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci. Je propose que Florian s'installe directement. Pendant qu'il s'installe, oui. Sorry, I switched to French at the beginning because I saw the title in French, and so sorry for the one. There is one question.
For the LTCC technology, I was wondering about the frequency of operation. You mean D-band, up to D-band 170. I was wondering which function. What is if the transceiver is already validated or PA, LNA?
Yes,
Can you,
we
yeah.
integrate NMEC chip in the LTCC.
Okay.
We integrate, not we use this just for the packaging,
Yes.
and we integrate this, and that's we did some development and validate the principle.
Yeah, yeah. But for the technology which is inside, it is which kind? It's 3.5 or silicon or?
Concerning the chip?
Yes.
Yes, it's ASGAR or silicium.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we will need to switch to the next presentation now. So after the far west, we are going to the far south. And oops, I go away. And Florian Kaltenberger is going to present us some. I'll let you introduce yourself about 5G and open air interface, I guess.
Thank you, Laurent, and thanks for switching to English. I was afraid I will have to do this presentation in French. I can do it in German if you want. Okay, so my name is Florian Kaltenberger. I'm a professor at Eurocom down in the south at the beautiful Côte d'Azur. And today I'm going to talk to you about open air interface. What else? This is one of our main projects at Eurocom, and on which I've been working on basically since I'm there. All right, so 5G is here. 5G is nice, but 5G has not yet fulfilled all the promises that it set out to achieve. Yeah, so one of the promises was that 5G is going to be used for Industry 4.0, for private networks, ultra reliable, low latency communication. We can connect all of our machines and do all kind of fancy stuff. So why is that the case? Because 5G is expensive. So 5G is a very good technology, but it's also a very complicated technology, and it's therefore very expensive. And basically, the market for 5G equipment is dominated by just a few vendors who sell you proprietary equipment, which is closed, which has predefined functionalities or cannot be adapted to all possible use cases, and yeah, is therefore not very flexible. Therefore, a few years ago, people came up with a new idea to open up 5G networks and make them more software defined, make them more programmable, and allow basically mixing and matching of components from different vendors. Yeah, so this is what people call Open RAN. So instead of having a monolithic base station, radio antenna with antenna, radio unit, and baseband unit, now in an Open RAN environment, you have a radio unit, you have a distributed unit, and you have a centralized unit, and all this, everything except for the radio unit, can basically run on general purpose computing software. Yeah, so it's much easier to change the functionality. You can have basically software defined networks. You can change the software, adapt it to your needs. Open RAN, however, should not be confused with open source. So that's not the same, but a combination of both is a very powerful tool to build sovereign networks. Yeah, we heard it before. Europe is currently struggling and investing a lot of money to be able to master this technology, to be able to build sovereign networks. Yeah? And in my opinion, Open RAN together with open source software is a very powerful tool to achieve that. And in that sense, Open Air Interface is today the most complete open source implementation of 3GPP technology that allows you to achieve this. Yeah, Open Air Interface implements both 4G and 5G and both radio access network and core network. Yeah, there are other types of open source software out there that can be used for this purpose. For example, there's the ORAN software community, which has released some code, but it's not complete. It's, you know, it still relies on some closed source parts. Then there are other softwares out there, some of which are, most of which are actually licensed under classical open source licenses. Whereas Open Air Interface is licensed under a new open source license, which makes it compatible with the 3GPP way of handling patents, with the fair. So it makes basically open source compatible with the patenting rules in 3GPP. So Open Interface has been existing for a while now, and today it's managed by the Open Interface Software Alliance, which was launched in 2014, and which today has 8 strategic members that you can see here. So we have 2 members from France, which is nice, Orange and Sequence, Fujitsu from Japan, but the rest of the members is mainly from the United States. Where this kind of technology is today receiving more attention than on this side of the Atlantic. So the goal of this alliance is, of course, to promote Open Air Interface and its open source software, open source licensing model, to support the community of developers. So we have a big team that does continuous integration, that makes sure that contributions to the code that, you know, they don't break the code, and that the testing is done correctly. And recently, we have also started to hire engineers directly in the Alliance to develop certain key features of Open Air Interface. We have different project groups. We have the RAN project group, so which is responsible for developing all the RAN components, so eNodeB, gNodeB, and also the UE. We have a 5G core group that is responsible for developing the core network components. And the latest addition is the Mosaic 5G group, which is basically developing control mechanisms, orchestration and management for both RAN and core network. So all these components are under the OAI public license. There's one component that is not under this license, which is under a 3-clause BSD license, which is the MME. Yeah, and the reason for this is because it's also used in another project, and it was much easier to integrate it there under this license. All right, so with how does a cloud native or an Open RAN deployment of Open Interface look like? So you have your computing infrastructure at the core. You have your edge infrastructure, to which you have connected some radio units. And then within the same infrastructure, you can also run the control of all these functions. And then basically you have Open Air Interface components for all the different elements that you need in the network. I'm not going to list them all. And basically, with those tools, you can deploy a fully functional 5G network in a cloud infrastructure. So now, from a functional point of view, let me show you a bit more in detail what OpenInterface supports. We support both non-standalone and standalone deployments. So non-standalone is basically what is deployed. All the operators in Europe and most of the world actually deploy non-standalone 5G today. So it's dependent still on a 4G network. And only once you are, so all the control plane and all the authentication is managed by the 4G core, and only when you're in the vicinity in the 5G hotspot you can connect to the 5G hotspot. Whereas standalone, which is actually some people call it the real 5G, is the one that operates with the 5G core network. There's a kind of an intermediate thing available in OpenInterface 2, which we call the NOS1 mode, which allows you to only emulate the RAN components of the network. OpenInterface today runs on different hardware platforms. So historically we support USRPs, but today it also works with commercial equipment. So I'm mentioning two of them here. One is a remote radio unit from Benetel. So this works for NSA, and it's using the ORAN 7-2 split. And then we also work with AW2S, which is a French company that provides radio heads for both LTE and NR, but using a different interface, using an EC interface. And on the other end of the network, on the UE side, I'm listing here a few UEs that we've tested with OpenAir. Some of them also work in standalone mode. So one of the key components in this Open RAN networks are the different functional splits, that allow you basically to shift functionality from one side of the network to another side. So for example, if you need a low latency application, you want to have your user plane terminated at the edge. Yeah, so you need to shift some of the user plane functionality to the edge. And this is done by using these different functional splits in 3GPP. In OpenInterface today we support this F1 split, which is between the CU and the DU. This is one actually specified by 3GPP. Then between the DU and the radio unit, I already mentioned this ORAN 7-2 split, which we use with Benetel. And within the DU, there is yet another split available, which is specified by the so-called small cell forum, which is which is called the FAPI, the Functional API, which allows you, which gives you a clean interface between the MAC RLC and the file layer. And this can also be implemented over the network, in which case it's called the NFAPI split. One topic that is very important for this Open RAN networks or networks that run on general purpose hardware is the computational complexity. So of course, if you do all the signal processing on a general purpose computer, it's much less efficient than if you do it on a dedicated processor. So in the Open RAN context, what people are doing now is they're offloading some of the functionality to hardware accelerators. Yeah, and one possible hardware accelerator to use is this T1 accelerator card produced by Xilinx. It contains two powerful FPGAs, one MP-SoC and one RF-SoC. And it's very flexible, but one of the ideas is to use this to offload the LDPC, the channel coding and decoding or potentially can also offload some of the front-haul processing. So we integrated this card into Open Interface, and so that I show you some technical results too. I'm showing you this picture here. So what you can see here on the left. So these are still simulation results, but the real-time results are coming too. So what you can see here on the left is the comparison between the software LDBC decoder that we have in Open Interface and the hardware LDBC decoder that's on this T1 card. And on the left, you see the SNR that's required to achieve a 10% block error rate, which is the operational point of the channel coding in LTE or NR. And you see, you see very nicely that the performance of the T1 card is a little bit better for most of the MCS, not for all of them. And on the right side, you see the execution time. So this, in the case of the software LDBC, this is simply the execution time measured on the host PC. In case of the T1 card, this includes the data transfer to the card and back from the card. And despite all this additional data transfer, you can see that there are some gains to be achieved with the card. I believe we can achieve even more gains. The things that still can be improved here. But nevertheless, this is very encouraging, and using this mechanism with the offload, we will be able to build very high performance networks with this. How much time? 1 minute? Yeah. With questions. So let me just tell you a little bit about the other projects. We do support, let me just pick a few. We do support MIMO now as well. We haven't done that in LTE, but MIMO support is coming. Today we have 2x2 MIMO already on the downlink. And we are going to support up to 4x4 MIMO using link adaptation and everything. We're also working on FR2. So there's an FR2 version of Open Interface. But we haven't yet managed to test this with commercial equipment yet. Let me pick out some more of the exotic items we're working on. There's a project on non-terrestrial networks. So this is being specified now in release 17 to put 5G on satellites. So there are a few adaptations that are now coming out in release 17, and we have a project with a demonstration on this. We also want to support more radio heads, so we want a fully standard compliant O-RAN 722 interface. And we're also working on the other O-RAN interfaces, E1, O1, to be able to communicate with other with other controllers. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Florian. So I suggest that Philippe comes to get ready, and if we have one quick questions or two at most. I've got one very quick question, because I'm always curious about this. I don't know Open Air Interface. I don't know a lot about USRPs. How long would it take me to run a 5G network in North Europe?
Well, I think you should ask your fellow colleagues here. It varies a lot. The standard deviation on this process is very long. There are people who manage to do this in a few days. There are people who take a few months to do that.
So if you're quite good at programming, it can go fast.
Yeah. But no, it's not that. I have to say that the USRPs are not the best hardware platform. Yeah, we had a lot of the RF performance of those is not the best. So it depends a lot on your radio environment and your external RF. Yeah, so it's
and which frequency do you use for that? Do you have?
Well, we use the classical 5G frequencies at 3.5 gigahertz for NR and 2.6 for LTE.
And you've got special authorization to?
At Eurocom we have a license. Unfortunately, we don't have a large frequency band for NR. We just have 10 megahertz, and we have 20 megahertz for LTE at 2.6. But we have a big chunk at 26 gigahertz, and that's why we need to get the FR2 version up and running as fast as possible.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? So I think we're short in time, so I would skip to coming back to the center of France, to Paris, and leave the floor to Philippe Sibla, who is going to... Oops. So Philippe, I will, yes, let you the floor by changing a little bit the topic and talking about energy efficiency.
Okay, so I will start. So today I will speak about energy efficiency-based resource allocation. So this is a joint work with Thales Communications, more specifically with Christophe Lemartre and Xavier Le Turc. Yeah, okay. Ah, this one, okay. On the left, yes, on the right, okay. So the outline of the talk is very simple. So I will first define what does it mean energy efficiency for, not necessarily for me, but in the state of the art, okay. And we will especially see at the end that perhaps it's not necessary. It's a good criteria, but not perhaps the best one, okay. And then we will try to do an application on a specific system, and this system will use some retransmission scheme, which is called hybrid IRQ. Okay. So in this part, which is the most important part of the talk, obviously, I will briefly remind you what does it mean, an automatic retransmission scheme. And then we will see that we can solve this problem thanks to fractional programming. So the talk will deal a little bit with this tool. And so I will explain this tool and do some math about this tool. I guess I can use this one. So just I would like to show you a big picture before showing our application. So the objective is to minimize a function, okay, over a certain parameter theta, okay, and this function depends on the energy efficiency of each user, which is denoted by Ek, and theta k correspond to the parameters devoted to user k. Okay, so we want to minimize this function subject to some constraints. So we have some individual constraints. So for each user, related especially to the quality of transmission, so to the quality of service. And the quality of service can be the frame rate, the delay, the data rate. It depends on what you want to do, okay? And we have also some joint constraints. So this is the second one. So therefore, we cannot work user by user, but you need to do a joint optimization over all the users. And the most important element here, obviously, is Ek. Okay, this one, yes. So Ek is the energy efficiency parameter or criterion, okay? And Ek is defined usually in that way. So it's a ratio, because it's an efficiency, so it's a ratio between the number of data you are able to transmit, and you are able to transmit correctly. So it means the bits are correct at the receiver side, okay? Over the link K, because I consider the energy efficiency for user K here, divided by the consumed energy on this link. And the consumed energy is not necessarily only the transmit energy, okay? So I will take into account all the energy I need to do the transmission. Okay. So just why energy efficiency? What we can say, what we can see with energy efficiency. And I will have 3 examples to see what can energy efficiency provides. So here I will draw, so here on the x-axis we have the transmit power, so just the transmit power here, okay? And on the right I have the data rate, okay? And the green curve corresponds to the data rate with respect to the transmit power. So this is one model I consider for the data rate, okay? According to the transmit power, okay? And now I would like to solve, for example, the problem 1. Okay? So I would like to minimize the power given a data rate constraint. Okay? And imagine that the data rate constraint is, I would like at least 1 megabit per second. Obviously, as the data rate is an increasing function with respect to the transmit power, okay, I just have to set, so 1 megabit is here actually, so I have this point, okay, and so I will consume about 26 or 27 dBm in my example. So imagine now I would like to solve another problem. I just would like to maximize the data rate, but I have a power constraint to do that, okay, and the power constraint is 36 dBm in my example, okay. So I am here, and the data rate I have is here, okay. This is a small triangle here, okay. So now I have two operating points, okay. One, where I would like to minimize the power given a data rate constraint, and another one, I would like to maximize the data rate, but I have a power constraint, okay. And what's happening if I do, so I have 2 points, 2 different points, okay. And now I will try to do to maximize the energy efficiency according to the criterion I provided in the last slide. Okay, so I need to put the energy efficiency curve. Okay, and this is the blue one. Okay. So now this is the energy efficiency of my system. Okay, so the optimal point is this one. Okay, so it's different from both previous points. Okay. And so what can I see, for example? Okay, the transmit power is close to the transmit power of the first problem, okay, but the data rate is close to the data rate to the second problem. So I provided, it seems, I provided a good trade-off between minimizing the power and maximizing the data rate. But it's a trade-off, okay? I didn't maximize the data rate. I didn't minimize the power. I did a trade-off. Okay. So the first remark is, unlike two first problems, I don't control the operating point. So the operating point on my system depends on the block curve. Okay. So at the end, obviously, I know the power I will use. I know the data rate I will use, but I cannot force the power I would like to use. I cannot force the data rate I would like to use, okay? And the consumed energy I have here corresponds to the transmit power, so how I obtain the block curve. Okay? So the block curve, I consider the transmit power plus an additional power which corresponds typically to a circuitry power, okay, PC. So second example. So the first message to take home is, okay, we don't control the operating point, which can be an issue for a network manager, okay? So second example, okay. So now I will have a model for the data rate. I will consider that the data rate scales I log 1 plus P, okay, where P corresponds to the transmit power, okay? And the constant power, once again, is P plus a constant PC, okay? And on the left, I plot the energy efficiency with respect to P when PC is equal to 0. Okay, so you just look at, or you just take into account the transmit power. Okay. So you have a log of P over P. Okay. And the log of P over P is maximized when P is equal to 0. Okay. So it means stop the transmission, okay? Switch off the system. Okay. Okay. And obviously when P increase, the energy efficiency decreases a lot. Okay. So it means that the energy efficiency criterions make sense only and only if PC is different from 0. So only if you consider the secretary power. Okay? So you need really to take it into account if you want to do something with energy efficiency. Okay? And the second point, and this corresponds to the second figure, here I plot the energy efficiency once again in blue with respect to PC. So obviously this energy efficiency decreases when PC increases because you have a constant cost which corresponds to PC. And if your constant cost increases, obviously your energy efficiency decreases. Okay? And on the red one, I plot the P, the optimal P given the value of PC. And once again, we can see that P is an increasing function with respect to PC, which is quite reasonable, okay? Because if PC is large, so it means you have a large secretary power. If you want to use it well, use it. And so use a lot of transmit power to compensate for the loss you have with your secretary power, okay? So once again, the EE operating point strongly depends on PC, okay? Which once again is not good for a network manager, okay? Okay. And the next example I would like to provide about energy efficiency criterion is this one. So we consider we have a number of messages to transmit. Okay, so NP, I would like to transmit NP message. So typically here I would like to transmit 1 million messages. Okay. And I will consider, so I have a battery to do that. I will calculate the time I need to do that. Okay, and then I will deduce the data rate. Okay, and Q corresponds to the state of the battery. Okay, so the energy it remains in the battery. Okay, so if you use an energy efficiency criterion, obviously you transmit all the message and it remains. So you consume only 4% of your battery. Okay. If you do a maximum ratio, so here the maximum ratio is the maximum data rate optimization. Okay, obviously the time you need to transmit is smaller, but finally, the remaining energy in the battery is slower. Okay? It's smaller. Okay, it's smaller. And here I will use a minimum power optimization. So if you do a minimum power optimization, obviously the time you need to transmit is very large, and even the battery, even the energy remaining in the battery is smaller than with the the energy efficiency case, okay? Because you use less powers, but you need more time to do that. So finally, the energy is larger. Okay, and here it's another example. So we have a flow. We have a stream of messages to transmit, and we stop when it remains no energy. Okay, and so you can see once again that the number of messages you are able to transmit according to your energy efficiency criterion is larger than for the others. So for this last example, it seems to be a good idea to use energy efficiency. So let us use it now. Okay, so here this is perhaps the first paper dealing with energy efficiency optimization. Okay. So we will do a capacity-based energy efficiency optimization. So we'll consider, for example, k-users, downlink communication. So the energy efficiency is computed at the base station level. Okay, so you don't focus on what's happened on the users, you just focus on the energy consumed by the base station, okay, because you do downlink. And we consider FDMA, and the band is split equally in an equal manner between each user. Okay. So what you want to do is to maximize the energy efficiency. So this is the energy efficiency at the BS level. So this is the sum data rate, and once again we use an information theoretic metric for the data rate. So once again log of 1 plus p. Okay. And here you have the energy you consume for doing the transmission, so the energy or the power for each user plus a fixed power, okay, corresponding to the secretary power. Okay. And once again, you have two constraints. This is the total power constraint for the base station, and obviously the power is larger than 0. So we want to solve this problem now with respect to P. Okay. So just be careful. It could be very easy if you saturate this constraint. If the sum of pk is equal to p max, this sum is equal to p max, and then it remains only the numerator. Okay, you can skip, you can remove the denominator. But usually it's not the case. Okay, usually the optimal solution does not correspond to use all the powers. Okay, so typically the sum of pk will be strictly smaller than pmax. And so the denominator depends also on pk. Okay, and so we have a ratio of two functions. Okay, and this ratio is not convex. Okay, actually it's a ratio between a concave function, which corresponds to the numerator, and a concave function for the numerator and a convex function for the denominator. Okay, and this kind of optimization problem resort to fractional programming, because we have a friction between one concave function and one convex function. How many? 5 minutes? Yes, okay. I don't have 21 slides actually. Okay, I have some backup slides. Don't worry. Okay, so perhaps I will skip this part. Okay, so this is some review on fractional programming. So how to do that? So it exists some algorithms to do that in a very efficient way. Okay, in order to obtain the optimal point. It's not an approximation. You really obtain the optimal point. Okay. Okay, so I will skip this. So now I will focus on what we did. Okay, because so far it corresponds to the state of the art. Okay. So in practice, and especially in tactile internet from Thales Communications, okay, the channel is not known. Okay, so you know, for example, for doing this optimization, you assume that G, which corresponds to the channel, is known. Okay, but usually it's not the case, especially in a D2D communication scheme. Okay, so we consider we know only the statistics of the channel at the transmitter side. Okay, and so in order to have a good transmission, we need to do retransmission. Okay, or we need to accept to do retransmission. Sometimes it's useless, but we need to accept to do retransmission. Okay, so therefore we will consider a retransmission scheme, which is called hybrid ARQ. Okay, and I will define it just later. And for the user K, we will consider we have FDMA, so you use only some subbands, okay? And what we will optimize is the proportion of bandwidth you use, okay? So we will not do an assignment for each subband, you just calculate the proportion of subband we will use, okay? And we would like also to optimize the energy you used on this for user K. Okay. So I have two parameters to optimize, gamma and Q. Okay. Okay, so RQ. So you consider you have, for example, one packet, S1, so you transmit the packet, and if the packet is not correctly decoded at the receiver side, you send an acknowledgement by a non-acknowledgement, a NAC, and you transmit once again the same packet, okay? And if you succeeded to decode it, you stop the communication and you send a new packet, okay? Okay, so in that case, you transmit the same packet, you retransmit the same packet, and at the receiver side, you manage packet by packet, okay? So it's not necessarily the best way to do, okay? The best way to do is this one, okay? So once again, you transmit the first packet, okay, the packet is not decoded, so you ask the transmitter to retransmit a redundancy. So not necessarily the same one, but just redundant bits associated with the first one, okay? And then at the receiver side, you keep both previous packets and you try to decode according to the knowledge of these both packets, okay? So just for example, on time slot 1, you receive S11 plus noise. On packet 2, you receive S12 plus noise, but S1 corresponds to the same bits, okay? And so you try to decode according to the knowledge of Y1 and Y2, okay? So you keep the packets, okay? So the performance metrics for hybrid ARQ are not necessarily numerous, but we have 4 performance metrics, 4 typical performance metrics. So the first one is a message error rate, okay? So the second one is the efficiency, which corresponds to the data rate, okay? But it's the data rate, but you consider only the bits without error here, okay? So it's not a raw data rate. It's a data rate associated with the data which have been correctly decoded. Okay? And you have also the delay, the jitter, and so on. Okay? So it means 2 slides, actually. So our practical optimization was this one, actually. Okay? So once again, we'd like to minimize over gamma and E, so the energy and the bandwidth. So we sum over all the user, and so this is the energy efficiency for each user. So the denominator corresponds to the constant part here, so the circuitry power, and here this is the power you used, okay? And in the numerator, it corresponds to the data rate, and the data rate here is just the number of bits you use per constellation times the rate of the code, of the error correcting code, times the bandwidth you use, times, because you consider only correct bits, times the error probability, or the probability of correct detection. So 1 minus the error probability. Okay, so we try to solve this problem, and this problem is much more difficult to solve as the previous one. Because roughly speaking, you replace the logarithm of 1 plus p, which is a very simple function, yes, it's okay, with this one, okay? And pi is defined by this one, so it's much more complicated, okay? Okay, but actually we prove that this function 1 minus pk is convex, and by doing some classical change of variables, you are able to solve your problem and to go back to the fractional programming tool, okay? Okay, and just some numerical illustration, and this is just before conclusion. So just look at the red, just look at the blue one and the black one, and you can consider the solid line. That's enough. Okay. So this is a sum energy efficiency. So this is what we try to optimize. Okay. And we have actually a data rate constraint. So this is a data rate constraint. Okay. So if the data rate constraint is very small, okay, it's what you obtain as a sum of energy efficiency by applying our algorithm. And here it's what you obtain when you try only to minimize the power. Okay. And so you can see that the energy efficiency is much larger by applying our algorithm. Obviously, we optimize it, okay, so fortunately. But when you increase the data rate, you can see that the gap decreases, and at the end, it's almost the same point. Okay? It's almost the same point because the data rate you want is very large, okay? And so you force the system to have a large data rate, which is actually not good for the energy efficiency. Okay? And so minimizing the power is almost the same thing as optimizing the energy efficiency when the data rate you fixed in advance is very large. Okay? So just as a conclusion, we have some problem about PC. So we have seen that PC has a very strong impact, okay, on the energy efficiency and on your operating point. So, and it's very difficult to model PC. Okay, so usually perhaps you just have the power amplifier model for PC and that's enough. But actually, if you really want to take into account all the energy you use to do the transmission, you need especially to take into account, for example, the manufacturing. Okay, it's not for free. Okay, building a smartphone or building a base station is not for free in terms of energy. Okay, so how to take into account this in PC? Okay, the second one is how to take into account also the decoding power, because here I use only transmit power and circuitry power. But for example, if I am very close to the capacity, so usually it consume a lot of energy to do decoding, okay? And so the decoding depends also on the rate you use, okay? So how to model this? So there is some model in the literature, especially this one, but how to integrate this model in our equations, okay? And just the last item, perhaps more philosophical item, okay? Just look at, if PC is large, okay, so it means you are not efficient, okay? Because your circuitry power is consume a lot of energy. So perhaps you did a bad circuitry, okay? So you work badly, okay? But you know that in that case, the energy efficiency leads to IP. Actually, to compensate for a bad PC, you need to increase P, okay? And so it means in that case, you use a lot of greenhouse gas, okay? Just because PC is large, okay? And but you use an energy efficiency criterion in order to reduce your consumption. Okay? So it's not necessarily a good idea. Okay. And for example, if you work well, if you are very efficient in hardware, so PC is very small, then we have already seen in my toy example, but it's true in any example, that the energy efficiency leads to a very low P. Okay? And in that case, it means do a low rate, a low data rate. And at the limit, it means switch off the system. Okay? So if you are very efficient in hardware, this criterion leads you to say stop. So I stop.
Thank you, Philippe. I don't say just in time, because, but no, not so bad. So we are going to eat now. So if we've got one quick question we can ask, or you can discuss with Philippe just during the lunch. I don't see people raising their hands. So yes, we just have 40 minutes to eat. That's short. But we don't have beer, so it should be okay.